22% of homes are owned by single women, and this compares to men who own less than 13%. So what we're seeing is this shift from family-focused products more towards convenient, really scaled to size products.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers are practically double.
We tend to see women waiting longer to get married. They're putting their careers first. Not to mention, unfortunately, the divorce rate has doubled for those 50 plus. And women are just outliving men. This is all really setting the stage for women to independently own their homes.
Welcome to AdviseHer, a special episode of the Advisor You Can Talk To podcast. Here at AdviseHer Investments, we've noticed that when it comes to managing money and planning for your financial future, there are some issues that impact women differently. With decades of experience helping families navigate their financial lives, we want to share that experience, highlighting some of the financial topics that are especially relevant to women, and give you some practical tips on how to handle them. Today, we're talking about buying or selling a home. Whether this is your first home, second, third, a vacation home, there's a lot that goes into the process of buying a home. It's both an emotional and financial decision, and it requires you to be very well prepared. I'm Dina Milne, and I'm an account executive working with clients in a relationship capacity. And today I have with me Megan Higgins, Assistant Director of Client Service.
Hi, Dina.
I'm also joined by Jen Zebniak, Research Analyst.
Hi, Dina.
I'm really excited to have both Megan and Jen with us today because they're both going through the home buying process, so they'll have a lot of valuable insight to share with us. Also with us is Sophie Benander. She's a client service manager. She works directly with clients, and she's also one of the founders of our Women in Wealth Management initiative here at AdviseHer Investments.
Hi, Dina. I'm actually really excited we're talking about this today. I just saw an article recently in the Wall Street Journal about how consumer product companies are revamping their marketing and really taking note of the rise in single home buyers.
Yeah, I mean, a lot more single women are buying homes, whether they're millennials or widows.
Yeah, 22% of homes are owned by single women, and this compares to men who own less than 13%. So what we're seeing is this shift from family-focused products more towards convenient, really scaled to size products.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers are practically double.
We tend to see women waiting longer to get married. They're putting their careers first. Not to mention, unfortunately, the divorce rate has doubled for those 50 plus. And women are just outliving men. This is all really setting the stage for women to independently own their homes.
Mm-hmm. So there are a few takeaways that we'd like our listeners to take from this podcast. First of all, when you're financially ready to buy a home, we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll also discuss whether it makes more sense to buy or rent. And finally, we'll touch upon the downsizing thought process and when it's right to do that. We're also going to move through the different life stages of a person. So we're going to focus in the beginning more on first-time home buyers and then kind of work our way through to people that are buying second, third, fourth homes. So I guess the first question, let's just dive in. The first question that we want to ask ourselves is, when do we think that we're financially ready to commit to buying a home?
Yeah, Dina, so there's some questions that you can ask yourself when you're thinking of buying a home. And the first is, how stable is your income at this point in your life? Do you foresee any major changes in the next few years? Are you planning on changing jobs? Are you planning on starting a family? And are you willing and able to take the time to maintain your house? If something breaks, are you willing to pay someone to repair it, or can you repair it yourself?
And these decisions really apply to anyone, any stage in life, not just first-time home buyers.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Jen, so consider the whole pre-approval process. How do you know how much home you can afford?
Yeah, so what I've learned is that if you're looking to put 20% down and you have a moderate amount of other debt, such as maybe car loans, student loans, then lenders will recommend that you look for a home that costs no more than 3 to 5 times your annual household income, and that's before taxes.
So in terms of my debt payments, if I'm making, say, for example, $100,000 a year in annual income, what should my numbers look like?
So with that example, you'd want to spend no more than $40,000 total in debt payments. And that includes your mortgage payment, car payment, student loans, whatever debt that you may have. Because obviously, if you're buying a house, you'll have more than $40,000 in debt, most likely.
Oh, okay. So That makes sense. Thanks so much for breaking down those numbers. I know you're like me, you're financially responsible, you let the numbers speak for themselves. So it's really good to know that threshold for that debt, especially for those of us that like to have a little bit of wiggle room in our budgets.
Exactly.
So Megan, I'm actually going to turn to you. So unlike Jen, this is not a first-time home purchase for you. You actually just recently sold a home and you're in the process of buying a new one. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Sure, I'd be happy to do so, Dina. And I do have happy news to report. I actually just closed on my house last week.
Congrats.
Thank you so much. Second time's the charm. So with that being said, I'd like to share some of what worked really well for, getting my pre-approval and allow our listeners to kind of see the breakdown of what that process looks like so they're also better prepared for when they're looking to buy maybe their first home or their second or third home. And so what we did before we started going to open houses, we wanted to make sure we got started off on the right foot. So we got our pre-approval before going to open houses. It shows that you're just a more serious and more competitive buyer. It's also a good idea to check your credit and get your debt assessed and get it in line. Banks use that specific information to determine how you handle your credit and calculate what's affordable for you, as Jen was referring to a little bit earlier. And that information impacts the interest rate that you qualify for at the bank that you're working with. And it's also a really, really good idea to consider where your down payment will come from.
So Megan, you mentioned the interest rate that you'll get on your mortgage. And as a bond analyst, I'm looking at rates every day, and it doesn't hurt that we're in a low rate environment right now.
Absolutely. And I'm thrilled about that too, Jen. You know what? I was able to lock in a lower interest rate during my pre-approval process on my mortgage.
That's great.
So I want to come back to the down payment. Speaking of down payment, where should it come from and how much should we put down? Sophie, you and I have talked about this a lot. What are your thoughts?
There's still this belief out there that you need to put at least 20% down, if not more. But there really are so many options out there where you can put down less, sometimes as little as 3.5%. But do keep in mind, if you make that decision, that there could be other costs associated with that down the road. So we're looking at mortgage insurance, usually a larger monthly mortgage payment.
So Sophie, for me being a first-time home buyer, it's actually pretty encouraging to know that a smaller down payment is an option. We live in the Northeast, and it can be really hard to save up for 20% down. I mean, it's pretty expensive to live here.
It's so true. 3.5% could mean $4,000. It could mean $14,000. It could mean $40,000.
Yeah,
That's a lot of cash. Mm-hmm. We have a client who's in her early 30s. She is excelling in her career. She's making a substantial salary, especially for her age and at this stage in her life. She's in the process of buying her first home. She's been renting for a long time. She came to us. She said, I'm ready to put 20% down towards my down payment, but I have more. I have more cash on hand. What should I do? She was kind of on the fence. So we kind of looked at everything for her financial situation. We talked about interest rates being low right now. We talked about how the market's doing well. And if she's kind of on the fence anyway about, putting down that extra on top of the 20%, she ended up deciding that she would only put down the 20% and that she would actually use the rest of the cash that she had on hand towards furnishing her home. And there were some other small home improvements that she wanted to do. So we also let her know, the 20%, especially living here in this area, is great to put down, but that we can reassess things in 3 years or 5 years, and if she has an extra lump sum of cash, she can always throw that at her principal on her mortgage. So I love this. I love this story, not just because she's an amazing, smart woman, but women are really on the rise for home buyers. 18% in 2017 versus 7% for single men.
Wow.
And speaking of high income earners, as you were referring to, Sophie, she could always double up on her mortgage payments over time, throw an additional lump sum onto her mortgage to pay it down faster. And what I think is pretty interesting, if you were able to make just one additional mortgage payment on a 30-year term, it shaves roughly 4 years off your mortgage. What a great way to give yourself some financial flexibility and start your retirement years mortgage-free.
That's amazing. I mean, it really makes a difference. And that additional savings, can be used towards retirement, whatever it is. It's money in the bank. So one of the things I see frequently with clients, especially our older clients, is the desire to either pay off their mortgage or avoid a mortgage altogether and purchase the home in cash. Now, if you have substantial investment saved, this makes a lot of sense. However, remember to pay close attention to capital gains if you're liquidating investments.
And can you just define capital gains?
Yeah, so if you've had your investments invested for a period of time, hopefully they've grown, and that growth when you sell them is taxable.
I just want to stress the importance here, too, of consulting your tax advisor, your CPA. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to capital gains on your home, and each state is different. Every person's situation is different. So, definitely consult your CPA on that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sophie. I think also an important thing to note here is, a lot of our clients live off of the income generated by their portfolios. If they're taking a large lump sum out of the portfolio, that's going to eat into the income that their portfolio is going to generate. And it's also a lot harder to put back, especially if you're not working and you're retired. So I know the desire, to be debt-free is a great desire. We all want to be debt-free, but pay close attention to cash flow.
And I don't know about you, but I've yet to hear of anyone paying off debt and then regretting it later.
That's true. That's true.
It's an emotional decision. A lot of people sleep better at night when they know they don't have much debt, but other people like to know they have a smaller monthly payment. So it really, there's a lot that factors into it.
It runs the gamut.
It does.
So we've talked about a lot. We discussed affordability, mortgage pre-approvals, down payments. But Jen, you mentioned previously as a first-time home buyer that you had a couple of surprises, especially when it came to additional costs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so first I would just like to say that you're probably going to be pre-approved for more than you're comfortable with. And then some of the ongoing additional costs are you have to factor in your property taxes and your insurance payments, but those you can roll into your monthly mortgage payments, which is convenient, but it makes those payments higher. And then some one-time fees. It can include HOA fees if you're buying a condo, lawyer fees, inspection fees, and closing costs, all of which can really add up right in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all great points. And I'd add, don't feel like you have to spend everything that the bank is allowing you to borrow. Most oftentimes, they'll lend you more than you can truly afford. And it's always wise to do some number crunching, get to the bottom line and assess to see what your monthly bills and your income outlay will look like.
Exactly. And a lot of times it'll actually look a lot differently than you expect it to, which is what happened in my case. But there are some great mortgage calculators online that are a great place to start, and bankrate.com is one of them.
Ooh, I'm a big fan of that one.
Mm-hmm.
So buying a home is not always the right choice. I think there are a lot of cases where it makes more sense to rent than it does buy, right?
Yeah, so I ultimately decided to continue renting. Sometimes it just makes sense to pay yourself back first. So for me, I'm newly engaged. I'm getting married next year. And so I felt better paying down some debt first. And then obviously now I'm saving for the wedding. But in a few years, I can reassess my situation and probably be in a better position to buy. Well, hopefully. But the circumstances could really be different for anybody when you consider all the costs involved with buying a house.
Well, so tell us some of the costs that you might save by not buying a house and renting.
Yeah, so when you rent, one great thing is that you're not really responsible for the maintenance. You have a landlord, so if something breaks, you don't have to fix it yourself. And more often than not, they pay for it and they come and fix it. And you don't have to worry about any of that, so you'll save some money there. And then sometimes you can even find a place to rent where utilities are included, and that can also really help.
That's great. And probably HOA fees, too. You're not paying HOA fees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Megan, what about, so we've talked about some of the cost savings. What about some of the actual costs that you pay renting that you wouldn't pay if you owned a home?
Sure, and I can definitely speak from experience, Dina. So as you all know, I sold my house, my first home, in January, went to a temporary housing in an apartment community because I wanted the ability to be able to be flexible with buying my second home. And so what I realized, because I've already owned a home, to go from that and then to go from renting, I realized the cost savings was better for me to buy rather than continue to rent.
How come?
The reason why is because The various amount of fees that go into renting. So first I pay, the month-to-month fee to give myself flexibility. It's nice that apartment communities offer that flexibility. But secondly, I had additional fees like a pet fee because I had my dog living there with me, a storage unit fee, a parking fee, maintenance fees, not for everything, but for some things. And utilities aren't always included. In my case, they were not. So I realized when I did the numbers, as we love to number crunch here, I realized, oh, wow, what I'm paying in rent and for all those additional fees, I could have a decent size mortgage for that.
I feel like that's what I hear from most people is like, I pay all this in rent. Like this could be going towards my mortgage payment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Most rental complexes, too, will raise your rent year after year.
That's
so
true.
Something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, so I actually have an example where renting made a lot more sense for our clients. I worked with clients who lived in Southern California. The husband retired about 2 years ago, and they decided to move to Northern California where their kids lived so that they could be closer to the kids and the grandkids. But the decision came up as to, should they buy a home or rent a home? So they had already sold their home. They made quite a good profit on it. And we sat and looked at different scenarios. We looked at the area. I mean, it's a lot more expensive to buy a home in Northern California. And we decided that maybe temporarily they would rent for a year. And so they did. And they enjoyed it so much. They actually liked the flexibility. Because in their second year of retirement, they were able to move and live next to one of their other kids who lived in Northern Oregon. And so they're enjoying that flexibility. They don't view this as an extra cost, and they're liking the freedom that renting gives them.
So what kind of reasons during the thought process did they have for wanting to buy? I mean, it sounds like renting is really kind of what they were leaning towards and what worked, but like what were they on the fence for?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because this was actually a very interesting couple to work with. They both had such different perspectives of the situation. So from the husband's perspective, this home that they sold in Southern California was an asset. And when he sold it, it's almost like he felt like he lost it and it needed to be replaced by a new home. The wife, on the other hand, had a completely different view of the situation. And from her opinion, this was an investment that they had invested in 40 years ago when they bought the home. It's an investment that did really well and grew. And she wanted to use that to supplement their living expenses. She didn't feel that it needed to be replaced with a new home. It was very difficult to get them both on the same page, and they couldn't actually vocalize that. But this is one of the reasons why we're doing a podcast like this. We have very different ways of approaching things as women. We view things a little differently.
Much more emotionally,
yes.
I think, too. Like to her, being with the kids, these life experiences, these are valuable. This
That's
is just
for
as
sure.
valuable as their investment, whereas
Yes.
to him, it was the actual replacement of the dollar value of the
Exactly. Yeah, and security. I mean, I think he viewed it as security as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah. So it was very interesting. I'm really happy to see how they've come a long way. He's a lot more comfortable with the rental now. He likes the idea of being able to move around and be close to his kids.
It takes time, and change
Yes.
is hard. Habit is hard, especially after 40 years being in a home.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of switch gears here a little bit. We focused a lot on our first-time home buyers and second-time home buyers. I think we also talked a little bit about the rental versus, buying decision. Now I want to switch over to focus on when and who should be considering downsizing.
So I actually just read an article that referred to downsizing as right-sizing, which I thought was just the best way to put it.
Oh, I absolutely love that because you know what? It truly is about making the right decision for you, and everyone has their own, situation.
Downsizing kind of has this negative connotation with it. So I think the right sizing can fit you in any point in your life.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
That's
the perfect
true.
way to phrase
That's
it.
true. And I think that's what makes it a very emotional decision as well. There's a lot that goes into it. Your home probably holds a lot of wonderful memories to you. You also want to look at the location. Do you want to be near family? Do you want to go into a community? Also, what about the house layout? Do you want a 1-story? Do you want something where the bedroom and laundry are on the main floor? What are you looking for? There's also a lot of financial considerations that go into it.
I think as women, too, we really have to think about that next phase in our lives. Women live longer than men. This is fact. Studies show 5 years longer than men. So we're constantly trying to think about, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, where am I going to be as a person, maybe not necessarily with my spouse.
That's true. So what are some of those considerations that go into this decision to downsize or right size?
So from the financial perspective, things to consider are one of the main financial benefits of if you lived in your home for a number of years, you probably accumulated a decent amount of equity.
Yeah, and by equity, you mean the ownership interest in the home. So what you own of the home minus the mortgage.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, other benefits to downsizing and buying something smaller could probably allow you to pay off the mortgage quicker, as we referred to earlier, or even be mortgage free. It also gives you the flexibility and financial freedom to enjoy more of the things that you love, whether it's visiting family or traveling. And Dina, as you mentioned earlier, it's also really important to consider the gains that you generate from the sale of the home. So make sure to take that into account and know how much you may need to pay in taxes from the sale. Again, each case is different.
I'll throw it in there. Talk to your CPA.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Sophie.
And if you are buying a second or third home, and as Megan stated, you probably do have a decent amount of ownership in your home, so you might actually have a really good down payment if you are buying again.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. And then speaking of, just having some money in the bank or a rainy day fund, it's also a good rule of thumb to have about 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses in your savings account.
Don't we normally hear 12 months of living expenses?
Studies allude that having 3 to 6 months worth is a good place to start, but it's certainly wonderful, obviously, if you can save more than that.
Kind of going back to that emotional decision of downsizing too, unmarried women over 55 is one of the largest and fastest growing demographics of home buyers. As Sophie said, women have longer lifespans. Are they confident they can take on a 15 to 30-year mortgage? And many of them want to look for homes with quote-unquote no bad memories.
I think the statistics kind of support kind of the other way of that where, we ask, are women confident? Do they feel they can take on 15 to 30-year mortgages? But I think the facts kind of support that they do feel they're confident because they are taking on women. Home buyers are on the rise, like we talked about before.
Definitely.
So
yeah, and I mean, this reminds me again of another client example. This is actually very near and dear to my heart. So this particular client, she and her husband retired about 10 years ago, and they were making a move. They were moving back to their home state. And they were looking at various buying options. So one of the things they looked at is one of those independent living facilities. And the other thing they looked at was just a regular, single family home. So they put their names on a waiting list for one of these independent living facilities. And a place opened up and they were about to, start the paperwork and everything. And then the husband at the last minute said, no, this is not the right move for us. We don't want it. And they ended up buying a home. And they were both comfortable with the decision. They made the home their own. They decorated it. It was great. Unfortunately, 5 years into owning that home, the husband passed away suddenly. And by that time, there was some wear and tear on the house. And so the wife had to have maintenance, replace the roof, do the driveway. And it was starting to become a bit stressful, for her owning that home. So I opened up this topic with her, and I actually hadn't realized that her 2 daughters had recently started the dialogue with her about this community, this particular one that she really liked. And, we crunched the numbers together. We looked at the various options, and she ended up putting her name on the list. A unit opened up pretty quickly. She moved in. She's been there for about 2 years. Best decision she ever made. She says that this was the right time for it. It wasn't right 10 years ago, but this is it. And every time I talk to her, she's thrilled. She's very social. residential. So it's a very good environment for her.
Does she still have the fern that you gave her when she
does.
moved in?
She does. She has a green thumb.
I love that.
And what a great example of right sizing really working out well for someone.
Yes,
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll just throw a note in here for for people that are looking into moving into these communities. There are several different buy-in options, and when you go into the community, they'll talk you through them. So there's a lump sum that you put down, and then a maintenance fee that follows that. Some of them will account for beneficiaries. So God forbid something happens to you, they will reimburse your beneficiaries a portion of that. Some of them don't. So you really want to look at those options. Make sure that you talk to your advisor about them and get a good grasp of how they work.
And a lot of times, too, these fees you pay will cover things such as taxes, utilities, food, entertainment, depending upon where you are, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's true.
That's good to know.
So we've talked about a lot today, and we hope you found it helpful. We've talked about the discussion of whether to buy or rent. We've talked about what goes into the home buying process, mortgage pre-approval, a little bit on the down payment and downsizing. Jen, Sophie, and Megan, do you have any last pieces of advice for us?
Yeah, I'll go first. So just remember that your closing costs can add up. So make sure you account for that with the money you've saved for your down payment, that you're also prepared to pay for these closing costs. And something I should have mentioned earlier when we were talking about additional costs, Dina, is that homeowners can typically spend $5,000 to $10,000 on yearly maintenance. It's another additional ongoing fee to be aware of. And then the last tidbit I'll leave you with is that the real estate agent actually gets paid by the seller's agent. So it's not to say that they're not in your corner, but it is good to be aware of who they're ultimately getting paid by.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. As a society, we're always alluding to buying a home as a step towards fulfilling the American dream, the white picket fence. But I think we really need to take a step back and think less about the concept and more about who. Who am I? What's my position in life? How does buying a home right now impact my future? Buying a home has great advantages for building wealth in life, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the best decision for you at this point in time.
That's true. And I think that no matter what your circumstances are, it's important to seek advice from a trusted family member, friend, or even your financial advisor. Just like an investment portfolio, there's no such thing as one size fits all. Buying or selling a home is an important and personal decision.
Yeah, and this only touches the surface, so we would love to hear from you. We're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Every situation is so different.
Exactly.
And just as a home offers comfort and security, we want to make sure that your finances also make you feel that way.
Well, thank you, ladies. This has been Dina Milne, and I've been joined by Sophie Benander, Megan Higgins, and Jennifer Zebniak. Thank you for joining us today in this edition of the AdviseHer podcast. We hope you found it helpful. If you've enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe. You can also check us out at adviserinvestments.com/podcasts. We'll have more to come as part of our AdviseHer series. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to explore, please send us an email at info@adviserinvestments.com. We'd love to hear your feedback and to hear back from you. Thanks for listening.